there's one pretty obvious use of the Navamsa deities, of the Deva, Rakshasa, Manusha, or Nri, Navamsa deities. And that is in relationship compatibility. The Navamsa has to do with our marriage path, and in general the path that we're on. And marriage is really about two people joining their paths together into one unit that's more effective. Which means they have to some degree, be on the same path. The more they have a similar type of path, the better they'll be able to share their path, and the more productive they'll be able to be together. And we can see this to some degree with the Deva, Manusha. Manusha means Nri, same as human. The Deva, Nri, and Rakshasa, Navamsa deities. If two people's charts have got similar planets and lots of similar planets in the same type of Navamsa, whether Deva, Nri, or Rakshasa, then those planets are going to flow together better, and they're going to be able to be more productive with them. And if they're different, problems can intervene. Now, we've got the Devas over here, okay, and the Rakshasa over here. And they're always at odds with each other. They're at war with each other. These are the two sort of, in mythology, the two cosmic forces that are always fighting against each other. So planets in Deva Navamsas are just not going to do that well with planets in Rakshasa Navamsas. Okay, those two planets are going to be at odds. They're just going to be on a very different and contradictory course. Okay, a different and conflicting course is the way I want to say it. So one person has Venus in a Deva Navamsa, another one has Venus in a Rakshasa Navamsa. Those two planets are going to be very conflicting, okay? And along the path and the choices they want to make. Now, the two people may have a good Venus compatibility based on the nakshatra the Venus is in and the Rashi it's in, based on the Kuta points and all that stuff, as I taught in the relationship course. So they might actually have a Venus that can do a lot together. But if each person's Venus is going down a different path, one in a Deva and one in a Rakshasa, they're going down conflicting paths, which are going to have different expectations of that Venus. And so the people won't really be able to put their Venuses to the use that we would expect them to. So Venuses are compatible in the birth chart, but they're going down conflicting paths. So how can they come together and give all that benefit shown in the birth chart and based on the nakshatra, based on the normal compatibility? They won't be able to. So anytime you see planets in Deva and Rakshasa Navamsas, those planets will be in conflict with each other, meaning they'll be on conflicting paths. They may actually be very synchronized with each other in respect to the compatibility I taught on the compatibility course, meaning the nakshatras are compatible, the rashis are compatible, and so on. But they only can really benefit from the compatibility if they're on the same path. If they're on conflicting paths, they won't be able to. Okay? So, planets in Deva or Rakshasa Navamsas will be conflicting in two persons' charts. So one person has more in Deva and one more in Rakshasa. We've got conflicting paths in that person. Okay? So, these two are always going to be a negative mark in compatibility. It'll be harder for people to stay together, no matter how good the rest of their compatibility is, if they're on these two very conflicting paths. If one is Deva and one is Rakshasa. Okay? Then down here we have Nri, or human, or Manusha, as I keep calling it, which is another word for human. Nri is okay with Deva, and it's okay with Rakshasa. Nri kind of sits in the middle. It can somewhat share the Deva path, and it can somewhat share a path with Rakshasa, and Rakshasa can adjust to Nri path, and Deva can adjust to Nri path. I mean, they can share some stuff there. It's not ideal, but it's doable. Okay? But it's the Deva and Rakshasas that are in that eternal conflict. Whereas humans can team up with the Devas or team up with the Rakshasas and vice versa occasionally, even though it's not the most natural thing. The best is when both things are largely Deva, or both are people are Rakshasa, or both are Nri. Okay? When you have people on the same path, whether Deva path, Nri path, or Rakshasa path, when those paths are the same between two people's planets and two people's charts in general, there's more room for sharing, more room for productivity. If it's a human, a Nri and Deva, or Nri and Rakshasa, it's acceptable, meaning there's enough room to make things work. But if there's a Deva Navamsa with a Rakshasa Navamsa person, they're just on conflicting paths. So even if they have great planets in the other normal Kuta measurements of compatibility, then they're still going to be on conflicting paths. They won't be able to share all that anyway. Okay? And you'll remember, it's traditional to look at the moon for compatibility as being the most important planet and doing all these nakshatra calculations to see how good the moons are. And that's the most important part of compatibility. But we also want to do those sun calculations for all the other planets, as I showed in my astrology, my compatibility course, and as we do in Kala, we have the calculations for all the planets and the ascendant. And that's the fundamental compatibility. And after that, check to see if the people are on a path that's shareable. Deva Rakshasa path is not shareable. Deva human path is shareable enough. Human Rakshasa path is shareable enough. The best is Deva, Rakshasa, or human. Okay? When they're on the same path. And then there's just so much more for them to share. So sometimes you might see people who've got some good compatibility stuff, but they're still not sharing as involved with each other as you'd expect them to be. The reason will be because they've got too much conflicting paths. One person's too much Deva, one person's too much Rakshasa, or whatever. Okay? As an example for this, we're going to use a chart of a woman who's had more than one man in marriage. Okay? We're going to look at the chart of Angelina Jolie. Okay? Angelina has her sun in Nri, in human Navamsa. The moon's in Deva, I'll put a D. Mars is in Deva too. Mercury is in Deva. Jupiter is in Rakshasa, I'll put an R for Rakshasa. Venus is in Rakshasa. Saturn's in Rakshasa. And then her Lagna is in Rakshasa too. Okay? So she's got just a little human, but she's mostly Deva Rakshasa, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 if we include the Lagna. Saturn's with an R here. So 3 planets and the Lagna in Rakshasa Navamsas. 3 planets in Deva Navamsas. And of course in the Navamsa we know one of the most important planets for the type of person and the person's focus is the moon, which is in Deva. Okay? So they're a mix, a pretty equal balance of Deva and Rakshasa, with hardly any Nri or human. Okay? Now compare that to her first boyfriend, who is Johnny Lee Miller, which I'll put JLM there. He had a Deva sun, a Rakshasa moon, a Rakshasa Mars, a Deva Mercury, a Rakshasa Jupiter, a Rakshasa Venus, and a Rakshasa Saturn. We don't know his Lagna, unfortunately. So you can see these two people both had a lot of Rakshasa and Deva. He didn't have as much Deva as her, so she was on more of a Deva path than him. So that's going to reduce some of the sharing. The main problem comes in is that the moons between these two people are very negative. The moons are, again, that's the most important planet for compatibility. Deva for Angelini and Rakshasa for Johnny Lee Miller. So then that shows as individuals they're on incompatible paths. All the other planets just show different aspects of us, but the individuality of the person is always the moon. So in compatibility, the moon's always the most important. And then within that, everything else is just better or worse. Okay? So the main problem they had in their Navamsa deity compatibility is that they're on two very different paths as individuals. Angelina on a Deva and Johnny Lee Miller on a more Rakshasa path. Even though Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn were all on a Rakshasa path, that would have given them a lot more to share and a lot more to be productive with. But on the base, their individuality is taking them down different paths. And that's a hard conflict to overcome. It's not ideal. Just like when we do the normal compatibility, when the moons are good, it's going to give a good foundation. If the other planets are good too, it just shows more and more things that people can really flow with. If the moons are good and the other planets are bad, they can still have a good relationship, but just some things they won't flow with. But the foundation, most important thing is the moon. So a decent matching of lots of Rakshasa qualities in both, very little human quality, okay, which is fine. But one thing you'll find is people who've got a lot of Deva and Rakshasa Navamsas tend to be the type of people whose life tends to go all over the place more in general. It's the human, the Nri Navamsas that have that steadfastness and consistency, which makes sense because those are the fixed signs in the Navamsa, right? The movable, which are the Deva signs, and the duals, which are the Rakshasa signs, are much more prone to changes and breaks and coming apart and coming together than are the human signs who like to just plod along more and be more fixed. So one of the reasons that both these people had some difficulty maintaining a marriage very long is just because there's so little human between them. It's humans that marry for life, Devas and Rakshasas are always having all these heavenly dramas and romantic betrayals and all this weird stuff. They're just not as consistent and stable. But between their individual matching, the moon of Angelina being Deva and Johnny Lee Miller's being Rakshasa is a negative to the amount that they can share because they are on different paths. And so it's not an ideal match. Okay? After that, she got married to Billy Bob Thornton. Okay, one of the, definitely a character in Hollywood. Now, Billy Bob had a Deva moon, a Deva sun, a Rakshasa moon, a human or Nri Mars, a Deva Mercury, a Deva Jupiter, a human Nri Venus, a human Nri Saturn, and we don't know his logna either. Okay? So we see the same thing. A Rakshasa moon is not going to be compatible with Angelina's Deva moon. Right there, that's a strike against them being able to share fully. They're just on a different path. And not only different, but a conflicting path. Now, a human moon could be acceptable with Angelina's Deva moon because humans is not going to conflict with the Deva. There's enough room to share. But a Rakshasa path is going to conflict with the Deva path. Okay? Then they have some good things, though. The Deva son of Billy Bob will match okay with the human son of Angelina. The human Mars of Billy Bob will match with okay with the Deva of Angelina's Mars. Mercury is Deva for both. All of them. See the quality that we have? The thing we have in common in her relationship so far? The Mercury is always square. Always Deva, Deva, Deva. So this is people she has a good friendship with, a good communicative friendship with. But when it comes to their individualities really matching, that's the consistency that she missed in these two relationships. Where she's a Deva and they're a Rakshasa path, which means they're just not on validating paths with each other. So these two early marriages, just from this we can tell, she is with partners that weren't validating to her individuality and partners whose her actions would not validate their individuality either. Because their individuality is on conflicting paths. Deva and Rakshasa is not good. But you see the friendship there, the Mercury, the fun and casual friendship of Mercury, the interest, the curiosity, the desire to explore and communicate and have fun. Mercury is a planet of entertainment, obviously. So these are all people that she would have worked well with. In fact, her first husband, she fell in love with on the set, which we'd expect from Mercury, which is the planet of acting, of working as an actor. Where they say Mercury has a sense of humor and can speak in many voices. Mercury is the actor. So we see this strong similarity of their acting and the friendship of acting being really a thing that consistently has brought her together with these relationships. Okay? Jupiter's not good. Rakshasa with Deva, that can cause conflict in Jupiter things. Money issues, children issues, philosophically they'd be on different paths. Saturn is okay, he's in Re. But the main problem we have here is the moon. Their individualities are at odds. Rakshasa of Billy Bob with Deva of Angelina. Had they had children, that would have been an area of conflict. Money issues would have been an area of conflict. Work, acting stuff would have been good because of the Mercury. But the main problem is this moon. Okay? Now, her current husband I think they finally got married. Brad Pitt. Okay, BP, Brad Pitt. Brad has a Nri sun, just like Angelina. He has a Deva moon, just like Angelina. He has a Deva Mars, just like Angelina. He has a Nri Mercury. He has a Rakshasa Jupiter, just like Angelina. He has a Nri Venus. And he has a Rakshasa Saturn, just like Angelina. And his Lagna is Deva. He's got a Deva Lagna. Okay? Everything except the Lagna, Venus, and Mercury are identical. So that means 5 out of 8 things are exactly the same, which is nice. Most importantly, the sun's different too. Most importantly, the moons are both Deva. So finally, she's with a man who's on the same path in general. They're both on a Deva path. Okay, their individual path is much more supportive of each other. That conflict is finally gone. Okay? Mars is good. So that means we're dealing with conflict and dealing with the hard things in life where they have to tackle things and fight things. They're on the same path, finally. Interesting enough, Brad's on a human path when it comes to Mercury. She's on a Deva. So they're good enough to share, but they're not as good as she had with these other people. So she's, you could say, traded in some of that working friendship for a relationship that much more supports the individuality, which is the critical thing. Okay? Then Jupiter is perfect. Great for children, and of course they have a passel of children, don't they? And philosophically that shows they're on the same path as well. Venus is acceptable. He's a human, she's a Rakshasa. They can work together, they're not on a conflicting path. Saturns are both Rakshasa, so Saturns are good. They'll deal with what's Saturn used for? Saturn's when we deal with anything that we just have to weather and toughen it out. We can't fix it. All we can do is suffer through it. Like when someone dies, all we can do is mourn them and get through it. When we get sick and we have cancer, and all we can do is get through it and wait it through, that's Saturn. Any type of those painful things that you just have to let time get you through, that's when we use Saturn. And they'll be able to deal with those things more effectively because Saturns are both in Rakshasa Navamsas. So they've really got a much better than average mix of Deva and Rakshasa. The only blemish they have, everything is either really good, meaning the same, or it's good enough, meaning a human with the Rakshasa or a human with the Deva. And there's only one bad thing, and that's their ascendant. She's a Rakshasa and he is a Deva. But the thing is, the ascendant isn't really that important. It's the moon that's most important. Because these are the planets of consciousness. The planets are what give us consciousness. Okay? which means all of our feelings relate to the planets. All the things that go through our mind relate to the planets. All of our thoughts, all of our hopes, our fears are all created by the planets. They are what's in our consciousness. It's most important to have our consciousnesses aligned. The lagna has to do with our physical path, our physical body, and when those things are in conflict, it doesn't create the kind of frustrations and pains that when our consciousness is in conflict. For instance, if Brad has to be over here and Angelina has to be in this part of the world, as long as their minds are attuned to each other, they can totally be happy with each other, right? But if Brad's standing next to Angelina and they're standing next to each other, but their minds are in completely different places, it's a big problem, right? So it's the planets, especially the moon, that shows our minds, our consciousness. These are the conscious entities. The lagna is just your body and where it's at. So they'll have some conflict there. There will be some conflicting paths there. But it's not going to cause problems. Okay, so times in life when they need to be apart physically, mentally they're going to still be attuned to each other. Okay? And that's important because it's the mental attunement that people feel on the same mental path, emotionally, mentally conscious path, whatever thing they're conscious of, that determines how close people feel, whether they're together physically or not. And again, the moon's most important. And they're perfectly acing that with both being Deva moons. So finally, here's a relationship that Angelina has that actually, they're both on the same path in general. Okay? And most of all the planets work out acceptably or very good. And, none of the planets are bad. The only thing that is bad is the ascendant, which isn't as important anyway. Okay? So this is another way you can look at this. And sometimes you'll see people who really get along, but they just feel like there's this element of conflict between them and their spouse. They really get along, but there's just something underneath snagging them, a conflictual feeling that they just wish they were doing more of this type of thing with their spouse. Or they just wish they were living life this way a little more with their spouse. Meaning, and usually that's when you'll see there's a conflict where one person has more Deva, another person is more Rakshasa. And so one person is having a hard time adapting to the Deva path of the other person or having that in their life where they'd rather just be more Rakshasa. Okay? And while so when that happens, there'll always be conflict. If there's Rakshasa and Deva, there's always going to be conflict that pulls the people apart. Now, even if there's a lot of difference, say you've got a person who's got lots of Nri planets, and a person who's got lots of Rakshasa or lots of Deva or whatever, but basically with a person that doesn't have a lot of human, they can still work things out pretty good because they're not in direct conflict. But there'll still be this feeling underneath the surface of, I wish this was my life a little bit more with this person. Because they're not supporting each other's instinctive path as much as they wanted it to be supportive. It's not in conflict, but it's like, I wish I had a little more of this. The human will be thinking, I wish I had a little more productivity with my partner or something. And the Rakshasa would be going, I wish I had a little more of just being loose and a little more adventure and a little bit more unexpected things happening and surprises in our lives. Rakshasas love it when things just shift all of a sudden and there's a whole new life upon them. And they'll want to break out of the routine a little bit. They'll be able to work together, but the Rakshasa will want to break free from that routine a little bit, whereas the human will be thinking, gosh, I want to just be a little more focused on what I'm trying to build. So there'll just be this little undercurrent of not full satisfaction, but it's not a conflict like you get between Deva and Rakshasa. Those are the conflicting things and the thing to watch for. If you see a lot of Deva and Rakshasa things like you see with Angelina and Billy Bob, or Angelina and her first husband, Johnny Lee Miller, it's just a matter of time before their paths pull them more and more apart. It's not a safe bet to marry someone when you've got conflicting Navamsas, especially with the moon. Okay? After the moon, the other planets that are important are Venus is important, which is the marriage planet. Jupiter is important because so much of marriage revolves around money and children. Okay? So those will probably be the next two important. And then Mercury, Mars are always important. All the planets are important, but by far the Sun is most important. So if you look at some of your past matchings and people, couples, charts that you know, and look at their Navamsa deities, you can real quickly see how there's a pattern of the satisfaction that people can give to each other based on the path that they're on, as shown by these Navamsas, by the Deva, Manusha, or Rakshasa Navamsa. And it's just one other thing to add to your compatibility to look at, especially for long-term relationships. This becomes more important because the longer term relationship are, the more we go down our path. If one person's on a Rakshasa path and one's on a Deva, they might meet along that path right here. They might meet, but as they progress, their paths more and more get apart until one day they're so far apart, there's no room but to do anything but break up. Even if they have a lot of good things between them, even if they flow in so many ways, there could come a point where they're so far apart, there's no room to flow. They're just too far away from each other. So another useful thing, and I think this is one of the reasons that the Navamsa deities are Deva, Manusha, Rakshasas, because it's about marriage, and ideally we need to marry someone who's on a similar path as us, has a similar culture as us. So these are the three extreme cultures: the demonic culture, the divine culture, and the human culture. And the human culture, we can say, has a mixture of demonic and Deva parts to it. Humans are both divine and demonic, but they strive to balance those things and be productive with both those energies. And if people are geared in a similar way, there's just more room for them to share, because ultimately we're going to share in accordance to who we are. Are we more of a Rakshasa type person, or more Deva, or more Nri? And that's the level we're going to want to share with. So we want our partners, Navamsas, to have enough of those matchings that there's some real good sharing going on between them. Okay? And then we also have to, of course, see the normal compatibility to see, can Venuses even share? Are moons even able to share? And this is just if they're on the same path where they have the opportunity to share. If two people can really connect emotionally because their moons have really good kuta points and everything, and they just are really comfortable with each other, that's great. They'll get along all the time. But if what one person wants to share are more Rakshasa ideas, and the other person wants to share more Deva ideas, they have to cut down on their sharing, because they're sharing they want to share very conflicting things. And that will reduce the happiness and the productivity and the sharing between the partnership. Okay? Alright, so play with that on your charts, and you'll